Chapter 1. Persuasive Speaking Techniques. Communication scholars agree that ancient Greece gives us the foundations of contemporary rhetoric. The need to speak persuasively manifested itself when the civilization implemented a democratic election process and trials by juries. As such, the intellectuals of the time developed methods of persuasive speaking that still apply to today's discourses. Back then, only the most elite citizens had access to these techniques because of the high prices that ancient Greek professors charged for this information. Use these techniques to persuade others that your idea or course of action is the best one available. This chapter is most useful when speaking in front of an audience. Aristotle's Artistic Proofs. If you have taken a course on public speaking, then you have probably heard of the terms logos, ethos, and pathos. These words refer to certain artistic proofs or persuasive tactics that rhetoricians often utilize to persuade their audiences. The proven effectiveness of the artistic proofs dictates that they still make themselves useful in contemporary society. The use of Aristotle's artistic proofs tends to make persuasive arguments more convincing. First, logos refers to the application of logical, deductive reasoning to an argument. To illustrate, imagine that you are trying to persuade another person that your favorite musician is more talented than an artist that they like better. Of course, music is a highly subjective topic, so your argument is neither inherently correct nor wrong. You might bring an element of logos into your argument by referencing things that can be proven. For example, you might point to statistics such as the musician's record sales, music chart rankings, and their album's star ratings on Amazon. Hard data that proves certain aspects of your argument make up the core of logos. Politicians utilize logos to make their case for global warming when they reference data from climate change reports. Charities use logos to solicit donations when they provide detailed outlines of what your money will be used for. Second, ethos refers to the credibility of the party making the argument. Continuing on with the musician debate example, you might utilize ethos when you bring up the fact that you work for a music production company, so you have knowledge regarding what makes an artist talented. In other words, you imply that you have the authority to make the argument that you are making. Advertisers make use of ethos when they apply celebrity endorsements to their product. There is an implication that celebrities would not risk tarnishing their image by endorsing subpar products. Thus, a celebrity endorsement adds credibility to, and thus strengthens the argument, that you should buy a certain product. By bolstering your credibility as a speaker, you stand to persuade others that you have the knowledge and authority to decide what is right. Third, pathos refers to emotional appeal. Many people make decisions based on their emotional state, if only to later rationalize that decision. For example, you might decide to buy a puppy because you fall in love with her. Then, later rationalize your choice by telling yourself that having an animal to care for will get you out of the house more often and help establish a routine for yourself. Emotions serve as a powerful motivating tool that one can use to persuade others. You might apply ethos to your debate by showing clips of someone crying at your favorite musician's concert, appealing to the joy emotion. Infomercials appeal to emotion when they show how frustrated people are without their product. Toy commercials use this artistic proof when they show ecstatic toddlers playing with their products. Establish agreements. Oftentimes, persuasive speakers find themselves faced with hostile audiences who put up a resistance to the speaker's ideas. The speaker's ideas may clash with the audience's ideology. For example, imagine a speaker faced with the task of advocating for gun control in front of an audience of NRA members. In this situation, establishing 1 or 2 points that you and your audience can agree on will make them more receptive to your ideas. They will see that you are not completely disagreeable. Frame the issue. You must give a reason for advocating for the thing that you are advocating for. A speaker advocating for gun control must give a reason for doing so, lest the NRA feel like the speaker wants to take away their rights. So, the speaker must make his reasons clear. He or she might mention how they want gun control because it will make the streets safer, or prevent dangerous people from obtaining firearms. Simply stating what you want is not enough. You better have a good reason for advocating your position, or else others will find a good reason to dismiss your argument. Chapter 2. Interpersonal Persuasion Techniques. In this chapter, you will discover detailed persuasion techniques that give you the ability to persuade others to perform some action or believe some idea. The freedom to say no. If you want somebody to go along with your suggestion, they must first get the impression that they have the freedom to reject it. Request the thing that you want of the other person, and then remind them that they have the freedom to decline. For example, you might say to your acquaintance, "You can totally say no, but can I have one of those beers in your cooler?" Your nonchalant, non-expectant attitude will not only make the other person more likely to comply, it will also make them like you more as you display your ability to get rejected. They are likely to say yes because humans have a desire to please the people and animals that they like. Performing this gambit will give the person on the other end of the conversation the impression that you do not expect anything out of them, and thus will more likely appreciate anything that they do give you. The ways in which you phrase this technique do not matter so much as do its implications. You can use phrases like, "But please don't feel obligated," and "Don't feel like you have to." Communication scholars generally agree that only 7% of communication is verbal. So, a genuine tone will help this gambit's effectiveness more than an eloquently strung-together combination of words will. Reciprocation. If you hold a door open for somebody, they feel obligated to say thank you. This technique takes advantage of the fact that humans feel obligated to help someone out in the future if they receive a favor or gift from that person. In many cultures, customs dictate that people bring gifts to the host of a gathering in exchange for their hospitality. So, you can make somebody feel indebted to you by doing something nice for them. For example, charities often give away flowers in the airports where they solicit donations. The thoughtfulness implied in the flower giveaway lends itself to more donating. Amusingly, travelers often throw these flowers away shortly after they receive them. The charity workers then collect the discarded flowers, only to give them away again to the next flock of travelers. One study conducted in a fancy restaurant in New York found that a server who gave complimentary candy to his diners received significantly higher tips than he did when he neglected to give out candy. His tips increased even more when he then let the diners choose a second piece. So, if you want to prompt somebody to do something for you, first go out of your way for them. Of course, reciprocation works both ways. If another being makes an effort on your behalf, ask if you can do anything for them. You might just develop a friendly relationship based on reciprocal favors. Foot in the door. The foot in the door technique gets its name from the idea that you must step your foot inside of a doorway before you can pass your whole body through. Similarly, successfully asking someone to comply with a smaller request first will increase the likelihood that they indulge you with a bigger favor. Think of the small request as your foot, and the weightier favor as the rest of your body. For example, one study found that a man, one at a time, asked hundreds of women for dates. All of these women were strangers to him. He received 5 times more yeses when he began his interactions by asking for directions or to borrow a lighter than he did when the date was his first request. You might utilize this technique by asking a coworker for a stick of gum before you ask them to cover your upcoming shift. You might ask your professor to look over your report's first draft before you ask for a deadline extension. Video games make use of the psychology behind the foot in the door technique when they ask players to complete easy levels before requiring them to complete more difficult stages. I witnessed a panhandler use this gambit firsthand. As I was pulling out of the parking lot of a strip mall, I noticed an elderly man displaying a handwritten cardboard sign that bore a request for donations. I had a few quarters in my ashtray, so I took sympathy on the guy and reached across my car and outside my passenger side window to give him 2 quarters. He thanked me and then asked for 2 more. "I just saw you had them sitting there," he went on. It worked, as I sort of obliged and gave him 1 more before I said goodbye and drove myself home. This technique will not help persuade anyone to comply with wholly unreasonable requests. For example, asking a stranger to load your bulky furniture into a moving truck before asking them to buy you a car will, most likely, get you nowhere. For a humorous take on this concept, see Laura Numeroff's illustrated children's publication, If You Give a Pig a Pancake. Mild confusion plus reframe. Usually, when humans communicate, they carry expectations about the ways in which their conversational partners organize their thoughts into words. This 2-step technique involves disrupting one's expectations of language and then reframing their mind in the moment of distraction. It is used to subtly influence another person while their guard is down as they work out the mild confusion. Start by phrasing the next sentence in your conversation in a slightly odd manner. For example, instead of telling a potential customer that a certain item costs $5, tell them that it will cost them 500 pennies. Then, while they try to figure out the more plain language version of what you just said, offer them a good reason for complying with you. For example, in that moment, you might say something like, "I'm offering you a bargain." Individuals are more susceptible to persuasion while they are in a state of confusion. Confused individuals have trouble making sense of their immediate situation and are more likely to rely on others to make sense of it for them. By guiding their thoughts along after you mildly confuse them, you stand to persuade them. Timing is essential for the success of this technique. If you wait too long after your oddly stated phrase induces mild confusion, then your conversational partner will be again fully capable of guiding their own thoughts by the time you get around to the reframing step. Give the reason for complying before they wholly make sense of your strangely said sentence. Authority. Those with legitimate authority can persuade others to act, regardless of the suggested action's morality. To use an extreme example, Adolf Hitler persuaded his officers to execute millions of minorities in Europe. More recently, one study found that participants would willingly administer increasingly painful shocks to another subject if the researcher told them to. It did not matter how much the shock receivers screamed. Around 80% of participants complied with the researcher's orders. Why? Because he was in a position of authority. Even today, high-ranking military officials persuade their subordinates to kill people from other nations. Authority is an immensely powerful tool of persuasion that can, and often does, have fatal consequences if the wrong people exercise it. Do not think of this technique's application as inherently evil. It has application in non-violent contemporary settings as well. Managers and bosses use their authority to persuade employees to perform at a certain level. Security guards use their authority to persuade concert attendees to behave in accordance with the venue's rules. If you want to better persuade others, earn yourself a legitimate position of authority. Door in the face. Not to be confused with the foot in the door technique, this gambit involves asking for a sizable request and then asking for a much smaller request. One classic example of this technique in action centers on a man in a bar who wants other people to pay for his drink. He makes his way around the inside of the venue, asking every single customer to pay for his cocktail. Naturally, every one of them declines or refuses. When they refuse to pay for the drink in full, however, he presents them with a much more reasonable request. He asks the customers to spare him a few coins. Most customers oblige him, and the man pays his tab in nickels and dimes without ever using any of his own money. Legitimize minuscule favors. If you can make people feel like their contributions count, even if those contributions are largely insignificant, then they are more likely to contribute more significantly. After all, if a small favor puts someone in your good graces, what would a large favor do? Use this technique to get people to do what you want. This technique involves making another person's minuscule contributions to your cause, whatever that may be, come across as meaningful and legitimately helpful. For example, charities often use this technique when soliciting donations from individuals and organizations. Their pitches include phrases like, "Every penny counts." Furthermore, panhandlers make use of this psychology when they hold up handmade signs that read, "Anything helps." So, if you want somebody to perform a small task or favor for you, let them know how much it would mean to you. You might ask for help with your cooking routine by telling your neighbor, "Hey, I'm super busy today, and it would really mean a lot to me if you could let me bum an egg off you." You could even further practice your persuading by following up with the freedom to say no gambit from earlier in this chapter. For example, after making your request in which you legitimize their egg lending, tell them, "But I totally understand if not." Remember that subtlety rules persuasion, however. Lowballing. Lowballing is a persuasion technique in which one makes a request with the intention of adding additional clauses to that request once the request has been agreed to. For example, imagine that a salesperson gets a client to agree to buy a product for $9. At this point, the client is sold and committed to making the purchase. Before any money is exchanged, the salesperson informs the client of a $1 processing fee, bringing the total up to $10. The client would most likely agree to this clause and pay $10. Why? The client has already settled on their decision to buy from the salesperson. Canceling the sale would create a cognitive dissonance within the client. A cognitive dissonance describes the uneasy feeling that one gets when their actions do not align with their thoughts and beliefs. Anchoring. Anchoring involves comparing one thing to another similar thing. Salespeople will use this technique when they compare their product to similar offerings on the market and then explain why the product that they sell is so much better. Customers perceive the salesperson's product as superior and thus think that they must be making a relatively sound investment if they buy the salesperson's product. Alternatively, salespeople and marketers anchor prices. To illustrate, consider the sticker price of a new car. If a new car has a sticker price of $22,000, it will seem like a good bargain when the salesman offers it to you for $18,000. The car may be worth less than $18,000, but it still seems like a deal because that price is anchored to the much higher sticker price. How can you use this technique to get something out of another person? Anchor your request to a much larger favor that somebody else did for you. For example, imagine that you want an unfamiliar acquaintance to let you stay a night on their couch in the middle of your long road trip. Before you mention what you want, tell the other person about a recent time when a total stranger let you a place to stay for an entire week when you had nowhere else to go. Then, relative to your week-long couch surfing endeavor, one night of hospitality will seem like nothing more than a mild inconvenience, if at all a type of burden. Of course, ethics dictate that you avoid making up stories for the purpose of getting what you want. But this is not a book on ethics. Social proof. Social proof refers to the idea that if everyone else likes or does something, then you should like or do it too. Studies show that a man surrounded by beautiful women is perceived as more attractive than that same man sitting alone is. Most people would rather go along with a group dynamic than go their own route and implicitly disagree with the decisions of a social group. You can make use of this principle in everyday life. For example, If you have a tip jar at your job, consider putting a few bills and coins in it before your shift starts. This will generate more tips than will an empty tip jar. People think that if other customers leave tips, then they probably should as well. Peer pressure works because of this technique's psychology. Many young people feel obligated to drink or use tobacco because of the number of their peers who engage in the same vices. In many cases, these substances have been socially proven within the social group of teens and young adults who try them for the first time. Scarcity. People can be prompted to take action if they believe that their opportunity for doing so will not exist in the near future. By placing limitations on one's opportunity to act, they will feel compelled to seize their chance before it goes away. Think about the last infomercial you saw. Chances are it included a line that implies scarcity. Infomercials tend to include phrases like, "Order in the next 15 minutes to receive this bonus offer," or "Quantities are limited." The truth is, these phrases carry little weight. You will receive the bonus offer no matter when you call, because it is always available. The infomercial's producers throw this clause into their ad and figure that if a customer asks for the bonus, then it was probably within 15 minutes of the last time the advertisement aired on some station. The producers imply scarcity, compelling potential customers to make the decision to buy at that moment, rather than wait for the right time. How can you make use of the scarcity technique in your life? Suppose you want to persuade another individual to go out on a date with you tonight. Imply scarcity by telling him or her that this is your last night in town. Or perhaps you are trying to sell your car. You have the right customer lined up. You just need him to commit to the sale. Imply the scarcity of your offer by telling him that a dozen other people are interested in buying the vehicle. No matter your cause, scarcity acts as a powerful motivator. Chapter 3. Mind Control Tactics. Mind control gets a bad reputation, and wrongfully so. When most people think of mind control, they picture evil manipulators completely taking away any autonomy that people have. However, mind control tactics rarely, if ever, take over the entirety of a person's thought process. Rather, they subtly influence the actions or thoughts that a person exhibits towards a particular item, idea, or subject. Humans experience forms of mind control every day. For example, the colors that a corporation uses for their logo are designed to elicit certain thoughts about that logo, and thus the company that it represents. Illusion of choice. The illusion of choice theory comes from the idea that people will be more likely to make a certain decision if they believe that they have their choice of options in making that decision. We should understand how this gambit works when shoppers decide which brand of products to buy. To illustrate this technique in effect, imagine that a shopper in a convenience store wants to purchase a bottle of iced tea for themselves. They browse the store's refrigerator and happen upon two brands that pique their interest: Lipton and Pure Leaf. They probably believe that they have the choice of which company's product they want to buy. What they might not know, however, is that PepsiCo owns both of these aforementioned brands of iced tea. Through a chain of subsidiaries, PepsiCo ultimately reaps profits from the purchases of bottles of both Lipton and Pure Leaf iced teas. PepsiCo provides consumers with the illusion of choice of which brand they will support. If both of these iced tea products bore a large Pepsi logo, consumers might mentally lump both of them together as one choice instead of two, thus reducing the chances that a consumer will choose their brand or brands. In this iced tea example, consumers decide to support PepsiCo, but believe that they have the choice not to do so. Even if you do not own a multinational corporation, you can still use this tactic to affect the decisions that others make. To illustrate, when I was in college, I had a roommate who did not put a lot of effort into keeping our apartment clean. When I needed him to do his part, I made him feel like he had a choice in the matter. I would say to him, "Okay, I will vacuum and clean the sink. Do you want to clean the shower or the toilet today?" I gave him no choice in whether or not he did his fair share of the cleaning, but he was made to feel like he had a choice in the matter. Deprogramming. Deprogramming is the active process of unlearning the systems of knowledge that have been firmly embedded into your thinking. In other words, deprogramming equates to actively reversing the programming that one has received. For example, when people move to a new country, they often have to go through a period of deprogramming where they unlearn all of their old cultural customs that the new country looks down upon. For example, in the United States, strangers often engage in small talk with one another in public. However, in many foreign nations, striking up a conversation with a random stranger is considered out of line. Thus, an American moving overseas must go through a period of deprogramming in which they unlearn their habits of talking to strangers in public. In less commonly discussed scenarios, former cult members need a thorough deprogramming in order to adjust to society outside of the cult. Cults brainwash members into believing strange, off-the-wall philosophies that have no place in mainstream society. During the time that cult members are in a cult, they receive information from no source of authority other than the cult leader. Thus, they get input from only one person who may or may not have their best interests in mind. Therefore, the cult leader has the means to program his or her members. Furthermore, presidential candidates program you to believe that they know how to run the country. Advertisers program you to believe that you need their products. Preachers program you to believe that their religion will save you from eternal suffering. Whether or not you move countries or belong to a cult, your mind has been programmed. Programming happens naturally. The key to coping with the programming that we all experience is not trying to destroy or block out sources of programming, but rather living life with a sense of awareness. Be aware of the persuasive input that influences your perception of reality. Humans do not experience reality, only their perception of it. Following the advice in this section can help you deprogram your mind and expand your perspective. First and foremost, as mentioned earlier, be aware of incoming programming. You receive programming from all kinds of sources. We have to learn our culture. Therefore, your own culture is a form of programming. Culture is not instinctive. Additionally, the lessons that your parents teach you count as programming. Advertisements try to program you into believing that their product will make your life infinitely better. By recognizing these messages as programming instead of dogmas, you are well on your way to deprogramming yourself. Next, be aware of widespread fallacies. It used to be a fact that the earth was flat. It also used to be true that the sun moved around the earth. Societal truths often take precedence over universal truths in the minds of those who inhabit said society. The common knowledge that your community takes for granted might just be programming. Third, be aware of your own internal judgments. Some people go around silently diagnosing the mental condition of everyone that they meet. Others mentally rate women's attractiveness on a numerical scale from 1 up to 10. The standards by which you judge others are a result of programming. Sure, your fellow bus passenger might overtly exhibit symptoms of ADHD, but you have likely been programmed to associate symptoms with the name of a mental condition. ADHD is a real disorder, but using tobacco and masturbating were once considered reasons for admission to an asylum. Fourth, be aware of self-criticism. There is nothing wrong with admitting to your faults and addressing them, but when you beat yourself up, you are only engaging in further brainwashing yourself. Forgive yourself for having believed programming. Effective cult leaders subtly make their recruits engage in self-criticism. getting them to feel stupid for their belief system. When the recruits doubt their ability to decide what is true, the cult leader can brainwash them while they search for answers. The cult leader provides answers. Fifth, be aware of other people's criticism. When you feel less than worthy, you are more susceptible to programming and other forms of persuasion. If another person goes out of their way to point out your flaws and faults, they likely want to exert some form of control over your will. Sixth, be aware of unwarranted beliefs. You may have your own unjustified belief system. If you find yourself believing in dogmas that contain words implying assumed values, such as should, must, deserve, supposed to, ought to, entitled, and must, re-examine your thoughts. For example, you might find yourself thinking, fornicators deserve to go to hell, or I am entitled to have a few drinks after work. Next time you find yourself thinking thoughts like these, ask yourself, according to who? Look for concrete evidence to support these statements containing assumed values. Chances are, these beliefs are reflections of your personal programmed opinions rather than universal truths. Question why you believe these things. In addition, reframe these beliefs to I prefer sentences. For example, I prefer to drink after work, but even if I don't, I will be just fine. Seventh, be aware of exaggerated negativity. Many of us often engage in loathing as a way to cope with difficult situations. We might tell ourselves things like, this is the worst day ever, or I can't stand how completely horrible this is. Reserve that level of negativity for when the situation warrants it, such as when you experience the death of a loved one. Something trivial like spilling orange juice on your couch certainly does not equate to your worst day ever. Eighth, be aware that deprogramming is a process instead of an event. From television advertisements to subway station preachers, you will likely encounter various forms of programming attempts during this process. As you go through the deprogramming process, continue to exercise awareness regarding new sources of programming that might make their way into your psyche. Similarly, do not expect to fully deprogram in the course of one day. You have received programming all your life. Deprogramming is an active, ongoing process that requires focus, dedication, and awareness. Ninth, be aware of ego-driven lies and games that you put upon yourself. For example, one politician might promise to build a school in their community if they get elected. So, you tell yourself that if you vote for that politician, then you help build a school. That highly contrived chain of reasoning makes you feel important. Similarly, if a preacher asserts that his religion is going to bring peace on earth, and you join the religion, then you might believe that you too are helping spread peace on earth. Leaders often get their followers to defend them when criticism arises because nobody wants to follow an unjust leader. Do not fall into the trap of believing that following a leader equates to doing the same noble tasks that the leader performs. 10th, be aware of false comparisons. For example, many members of Alcoholics Anonymous like to attend meetings because of the social aspect and camaraderie that the organization's meetings provide. However, by comparing their addiction recovery service to a social gathering, they decrease their chances of recovering. They lose focus as they hone in on the social aspect and forget about the program's stated purpose. 11th, be aware of a lack of variety in your information sources. The mainstream news outlets in America tend to tell stories in very similar fashion to one another. For further perspective on issues, seek news from other English-speaking countries. In addition to the aforementioned America, they include Ireland, Australia, Canada, United Kingdom, Jamaica, the Bahamas, New Zealand, Grenada, Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, Guyana, St. Lucia, and Belize. You can get other countries' slants on issues without ever having to learn a new language. Lastly, go through life with a desire to know the truth about a matter. Avoid the X-Files mantra that implies a desire to believe in what is probably untrue. Sometimes the truth shatters the comfortable bubble of a lie that one has been living in. Other times, the truth opens up a world of new possibilities. So, open yourself up to the possibility that you may need to seek alternative perspectives on issues and philosophies. Everyone receives programming. Forgive yourself for having believed any misinformation. A sense of awareness provides the key to successful deprogramming. Indoctrination. Sometimes referred to as thought reform, indoctrination happens when a leader or organization persuades a group or an individual to accept and believe a system of knowledge without ever questioning its legitimacy, truthfulness, or morality. Religious leaders indoctrinate their followers when they teach that questioning the deity's teachings is an act of blasphemy. Your high school history teacher was likely tasked with indoctrinating students into the notion that your country was the good guy in every war that it ever fought. Government-sponsored public schools in America indoctrinate school children by leading a recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. Unfortunately, this form of persuasion effectively claims the minds of its victims. This section details the psychology behind the indoctrination process. Indoctrination's ultimate purpose is to persuade another person to wholeheartedly believe in a system of teachings that benefit the indoctrinator. The penultimate purpose, then, is to get the victim to forget who they are and what they stand for, so that that knowledge can be replaced with the new teachings. This type of thought reform requires 4 steps: deceptive recruiting, isolation, bread dependency, and dread. The indoctrination process begins with deceptive recruiting. In order for a leader to indoctrinate someone into their religion, belief system, or cult, they must first entice that person into joining the organization. Many leaders, especially those leading cults, lie or hide information concerning the expectations that the new lifestyle brings. Leaders often hide the unlawful, unethical, commanding nature of their practices until the recruits fully commit and prove themselves to the organization and its leaders. Furthermore, through the use of chants, drugs, or meditation, leaders effectively alter the conscious state of new recruits to a more vulnerable one. This allows the indoctrinators to inform recruits of their organization's principles, while the victims passively accept this new information as the truth. In other words, leaders rewire the recruit's perception of reality to match the goals of the cult or establishment. Next, isolation occurs. Cults refuse to let members interact with those who do not belong to the cult. Schools put up big fences and gates to prevent students from leaving and outsiders from entering. Governments establish divisive national borders. Furthermore, indoctrinators actively try to discredit the viewpoints of outsiders. Some religions preach that non-believers will live in hell for an eternity. Cult leaders teach that outsiders' views are incorrect and hazardous. Governments assign outsiders demeaning labels like aliens and illegals. By limiting contact with life outside of the establishment, leaders effectively limit the amount of perspectives that their members receive, thus limiting their possibility of experiencing a reality check. Third, indoctrinators breed dependency among their members. The leader makes most or all of the followers' decisions for them. For example, cult leaders usually instruct members on how to dress, what to eat, when to wake up, how to spend their time, and so on. National governments decide how you spend portions of your income. They call these portions taxes. Religions give loose instructions on who followers can have sex with, what vices they may indulge in, dietary restrictions, and so forth. In addition, leaders discourage questioning and doubting of their teachings. Many go so far as to insult members or make members feel unworthy for doing so. If you question a religion's deity, most often they will tell you that you lack faith. If you go against the principles of your national government, you will be labeled extremist and unpatriotic. Cult leaders also have their own unique shaming tactics for obtaining blind faith from their members. However, some forms of shaming benefit society more than they hurt it. For example, if you commit a violent crime, you will be labeled a felon. If you take advantage of a minor, then your name, face, and address go into a publicly available sex offender registry for the rest of your life. In theory, this fear of stigmatized labeling prevents many would-be offenders from indulging in violent and heinous acts. On the other hand, indoctrinators praise and reward those who unquestionably follow their teachings. Schools give out awards to students who perform well academically, usually done by giving the right answers to the test questions. Religious leaders constantly preach about how much love the deity has for his or her followers. Cult leaders praise members for loyalty. Indoctrinators will often flip-flop between praise and shame in order to keep members from getting too comfortable in their position, thus further confusing them and making them look to the leader for approval. Indoctrinators further foster dependency by having other indoctrinated members of their group single out and shame individuals within the group. For example, church members may volunteer to confess their wrongful sins to a high-ranking member. The high-ranking member lets the sinner rectify the situation by committing to an act of blind loyalty to the church, such as reciting hymns or scripture verses. Once members are fully dependent on the establishment, leaders only need to instill a sense of dread to prevent them from leaving. Finally, indoctrinating leaders ensure that member's life will be hellish if they ever decide to leave the organization. They accomplish this using a variety of tactics, including hierarchies and the threat of extreme unease should they leave. Some institutions of indoctrination establish a hierarchy. For example, popes, archbishops, and cardinals all fall on different levels of the Catholic hierarchy. While the hierarchy initially gives members purpose and something to strive for, it ultimately discourages them from leaving the organization. Members who earn high ranks on the hierarchy fear that if they return to life outside of the organization, then they will lose the status that they worked so hard to attain. Scholar Kenneth Burke argues that all humans are motivated by the principle of hierarchy. We all strive to be like the people on the top of the hierarchy. In addition to instilling a fear of losing status, the hierarchy serves to educate members of their ideal image. Additionally, indoctrinators promise that life outside of the organization will turn out horribly for anyone who leaves. Certain religions promise that you will end up in hell after you die if you do not believe. National governments detain those who stand in the way of their agenda. Even schools make the assertion that your life will be subpar if you do not focus on your studies. Indoctrination is a four-step process that leaves its victims in a state of confusion, fear, and dependency. Now that you have an understanding of how this process works, it is your responsibility to use this knowledge responsibly. Self-hypnosis. Is hypnosis a sham? Most of us have seen those television hypnotists. They come on talk shows armed with actors who are in on the gig, and then try to convince us of their powers when the volunteers try to convince the audience that they believe their shoe is their cell phone. While many self-proclaimed hypnotists get on television and ruin hypnotism's reputation, many reputable sources advocate for the use of legitimate hypnotization as a form of therapy. Self-hypnosis has many utilities, including changing one's own thought patterns, increasing confidence, overcoming commonly encountered problems, and breaking bad habits like drinking. When one self-hypnotizes, they are fully conscious and aware of their surroundings. Self-hypnosis does not induce a mystical, strange state of mind, nor does it require surrendering control. Rather, when hypnotized, one can come out of their hypnosis at will. They are fully aware, and they have control over their actions. Hypnosis simply relaxes and sharply focuses one's mind. As a result, they become more vulnerable to suggestions. You can practice self-hypnotization at home with the eye fixation technique. First, minimize distractions. Turn off every electronic device and gadget in your vicinity. Your focus is on hypnotizing yourself and not on anything else. Second, seat yourself in a comfortable seat. Uncross both your feet and legs. Experts recommend avoiding large meals that cause bloating before this step. Wear comfortable garments. Remove any contact lenses and shoes that you may be wearing. While it is possible to lay down instead of sitting, you do not want to risk falling asleep. Third, gaze at the ceiling while looking upward and inhale a deep breath. Do not strain your neck. Relaxation is key. Fourth, from this position, silently and repeatedly say to yourself, "My eyes are heavy and tired, and I wish to go to sleep now." Keep silently saying this in such a manner that causes you to wholly believe it. You need to perceive your own desires as true in order for this to work. Fifth, allow your physical body to relax itself. Imagine the limp, loose nature of rag dolls and relax until you mimic it. Sixth, slowly count from the number 5 down to 0 with intention. Remind yourself to the fact that you feel more relaxed with each count. Remain relaxed while you pay attention to your breath. Focus on the falling and rising motions that your upper torso exhibits with each exhale and inhale. Notice the amount of relaxation that effortlessly inhabits your body. When you are ready to exit your hypnotic state, enthusiastically count from 1 upwards to 5. At 5, stretch out your limbs. The drowsiness that you may feel will pass after a few minutes. Repeat this entire self-hypnosis process a couple of times. You will likely achieve deeper relaxation levels each time. Chapter 4. Propaganda Techniques. Propaganda serves as a highly effective mind control tactic. It comes in so many forms that it deserves its own chapter. Governments, organizations, and individuals utilize propaganda to persuade masses to believe certain ideas. The numerous techniques listed in this chapter have the potential to persuade even the most skeptical of audiences. While many of them have questionable levels of ethicality, you can use these techniques to further your agenda. Straight-up lying. This is the simplest and least subtle of the propaganda techniques. Just lie. Of course, people will likely see straight through your lie if they do a little bit of research, so do not depend on this technique. The big lie. Adolf Hitler advocated for the use of this propaganda technique during his reign over Germany. The idea behind this technique is that if you consistently tell the same lie to the same people, they will come to believe it. Do not make any suggestions that contradict your big lie. This technique came into effect when Hitler repeatedly implied that Jews and other minorities deserved to die. The big lie technique also makes its way into countless homes across the globe when the same TV advertisement plays multiple times in the span of one day. If the advertisers keep implying that you need their product in your life, you are more likely to buy it. Suppressing evidence. Think of this technique as telling the truth, just not the entirety of the truth. Omit some details that might steer your message in an unwanted direction. Dick Cheney used this technique in 2001 when he told a reporter that nuclear energy emits no carbon dioxide whatsoever. He technically told the truth, because it is true that the reactors themselves do not emit CO2. However, he failed to mention that the machines used to mine materials for nuclear energy emit loads of carbon dioxide. In a classic example, you might tell your teacher that you failed to turn in an assignment because your dog consumed it. You even provide her with X-ray evidence to support your claim. However, You leave out the fact that you never completed the assignment in the first place. If she believes you and excuses you from your assignment, then you have successfully made use of propaganda to achieve a means. Denial by lack of observation. I never witnessed that happening, so it could not have ever happened. The propagandist implies that they would certainly be aware of something happening if it were in fact happening. Erasing the truth. Sometimes the truth is ugly, and you do not want anyone to know about it. Joseph Stalin famously used this blatant propaganda technique when he ordered his staff to enter libraries and erase the records of his opponents whom he unjustly killed. They destroyed any documentation of these people. Any book pages mentioning them were cut out and burned. The erased from history people were assigned the term non-persons. Bifurcation. This technique involves presenting two opposite extremes as the only options. Popular uses of this technique include religions that preach that you either believe in their deity or spend an eternity suffering. You either support your government's agenda or you are a traitor. You either abstain from using recreational drugs or you are a dirty lowlife. Less extreme options concerning these examples exist. Cherry picking. Also known as selective observation, this dishonest technique involves sharing evidence that supports your agenda while simultaneously ignoring the evidence that contradicts it. To illustrate, Alcoholics Anonymous uses propaganda to improve their image and support the notion that the program effectively treats alcoholism. A spokesperson for the organization cited a number of people who stopped using alcohol after completing their program. When asked about the number of unsuccessful participants, the spokesperson said that he did not look into those cases because they did not interest him. He only counted the data which would serve to prove his program's effectiveness. Likewise, the American federal government uses this technique when calculating the national unemployment rate. Naturally, they cherry-pick data to generate a lower unemployment rate, thus bolstering their country's image and instilling faith into their citizens. They do this by only counting the people who visit the unemployment office. They also exclude the severely underemployed from their unemployment rate figures, such as those who desperately accept the first poverty wage job that comes their way. Cherry-picking lets propagandists persuade audiences of their message with little regard for honesty or thoroughness. Turn faults to virtues. Did you have shortcomings? Frame it as a positive quality. Inexpensive digital cameras that do not have focusing capabilities are often advertised with the phrase, "focusing not needed." The lack of a basic feature was reframed as a convenient trait. Accuse opposition of lying. Did somebody bring up a valid point that disproves your agenda? Just accuse them of telling lies. For example, in a 2016 American presidential debate, candidate Clinton accused candidate Trump of using hurtful rhetoric, even going so far as to quote him. Trump's response was to call Clinton a proven liar. Propagandists use this technique to deal with undesirable facts. Qualified lies. Essentially, this technique involves adding a qualifying word or phrase to a lie in order to make it technically true. You probably encounter annoying online advertisements that say something to the effect of, "Earn up to $1,000 a week from home." The truth is, hardly anyone, if not nobody, makes anywhere close to $1,000 a week with these programs. However, with the qualifying phrase, "up to," included, the advertisers could put whatever dollar amount they wanted to in that pitch, and it would still be technically true. $0 is included in the amounts up to $1,000. If these horrid scams were legitimate, they would be advertising with pitches like, "Earn at least $50 per month." Projection. Accuse others of the faults that you are guilty of. Several prominent religious leaders infamously used this tactic when they publicly preached celibacy, but turned out to be molesting children in private. Small number statistics. This technique involves taking statistics gathered from a large sample population and then using them to draw conclusions about a smaller sample. For example, about 1 in 2 eligible voters did not vote in the 2016 American presidential election. I voted, so that must mean that you did not vote. Alternatively, 2 in 5 mammal species are rodents. I'm not a rodent. Neither are my dog and my cat. That must mean that my rabbit and my hedgehog are rodents. Statistics-supported lies. Numbers never lie, but they might need some interpretation. Propagandists will often display statistical data, along with their skewed conclusion drawn from those figures. For example, you might make the argument that marijuana is obviously dangerous, citing statistical evidence which states that over 90% of the people who used the drug between 1830 and 1930 are dead. Furthermore, American congressmen and congresswomen used statistics to support their lies when they advocated for the criminalization of marijuana. They used the fact that an overwhelming majority of hard drug users consumed marijuana before graduating to harder substances to support their lie that marijuana leads to hard drug use. Correlation does not imply causation. They could have just as easily made the case that coffee leads to hard drug use, based on the fact that a huge percentage of hard drug consumers started consuming coffee on a regular basis before they got into the harder stuff. Burying the lead. This technique involves burying the essential details of a news story near the end of the article or publication. This is done in hopes that readers will either stop reading before they reach this detail or discount its importance because of its placement. Journalism customs dictate that reporters and writers place the most important facts near the beginning of the story. The New York Times infamously made use of this technique when they mentioned on the 9th page in a minuscule article that Al Gore received the most votes in the 2000 American presidential election. They technically covered the facts, but their strategy for doing so favored Bush's image. Wishful thinking. Do you want something to be true? Say it like it is true. During the 2016 election season in America, several prominent newscasters made use of this technique when they asserted that candidate Trump did not have any chance of winning. Other examples include statements like, "The American voters wholly disagree with my political opponent," and "Team X will be victorious in the World Series." Reversing reality. Propagandists use this technique when they need to go on the defensive. It can be used to protect one's image, ideas, reputation, and so on. Basically, you reframe the reality of a situation to project one that negates accusations made against you. For example, imagine that you clean your apartment while your roommate idly plays video games. Then, when you ask for help, he says that you are lazy and should do it yourself if you want it done so badly. He would be the one using the technique in this hypothetical example. This technique requires a lot of backbone because you essentially tell a blatant lie to cover yourself. Chapter 5. NLP Tactics. Neuro-linguistic programming, commonly abbreviated as NLP, is a system of techniques designed to help humans understand and subconsciously influence the language and thoughts of others. The tips in this chapter are designed to help you gain leverage when dealing with yourself and others. Use them to get what you want out of a conversation. Avoid immediate counter-arguments. If the other party to a discussion brings up a point that you disagree with, avoid expressing disagreement right away. Doing so invalidates the other person and makes them feel as if you lack listening and communication skills. Expressing opinions often requires courage, so instantaneously retorting with a counter-argument will almost certainly make their defenses go up. Whenever someone proposes an idea, they want to see their proposal come to fruition. Thus, they dedicate the entirety of their focus to their proposal immediately after making it. As such, They have little capacity for receiving new ideas during this time, especially ones that go against what they just said. So, respectfully entertain the other person's thoughts. Other people's thoughts are just as valuable and deserving of attention as your own. Express disagreement as a question. In the event that you do disagree with your conversational partner, bring up reasons why you have a different opinion, but do not explicitly state that you disagree. Instead, pose questions that prompt the other party to think about your point of view. For example, imagine that you are debating somebody who believes that college students should receive a free education. You believe that there is no room in the government's budget for such a benefit. Instead of telling the other person that there is no money for that, ask them where the money for a free college education program will come from. If they cannot give a good answer, then you have successfully made your point. Your questions should semi-subtly point out the flaws in their positions. Keep questions respectful and free of sarcasm. After all, they might just provide an answer that floors you. Establish general purposes. You set goals for yourself every day. You set a goal to use the bathroom, and you accomplish it. You set a goal to drive yourself to work, and you do just that. Interestingly, these smaller goals have larger, more general driving purposes behind them. Getting yourself to work might have a general purpose of living a financially stable life. The smaller goals are part of a larger plan. The next time you set out to do something, try to discover the general purpose of that something. An awareness of your general purpose can help you figure out alternative routes in the event that your smaller goal does not work out. For example, imagine that your immediate goal is to receive an increase in pay at work. So you ask your boss for one. Unfortunately, unless contractually obligated, your boss is free to say no. Now, consider the general purpose of asking for a pay raise: living a more comfortable life. You can then ask your boss for other benefits that would help you live a more comfortable life, such as a more flexible schedule or more time off for vacation. Both of you can then happily exit the healthy discussion that takes place. Stand up to intimidation. Negotiations are often riddled with subtle and not-so-subtle intimidation tactics designed to make the other person feel scared and unintelligent, and therefore less likely to continue engaging in the discussion at hand. You might make a point only to be met with a challenging retort like, "Really?" or "Are you serious?" People say these things in attempts to gain leverage. When this happens to you, do not feel obligated to add more reasoning to your point. Doing so will demonstrate a lack of confidence in your original argument. Is your argument so weak that you have to defend it at the first sign of a challenge? Calmly reply to intimidation tactics with confidence. "Yes, I am serious, and those are my reasons," will suffice. A confident response like this will cause the other person's side of the argument to appear weak. Intimidation is not a counter-argument. If someone were so sure that your argument was poor, then they would provide a solid counter-argument against it. Start with familiarity. Often, people resist ideas simply because they are unfamiliar with the concepts being proposed. They may want to do research for themselves before agreeing to a proposal. You can minimize this resistance by beginning discussions with topics that others are likely to be familiar with. Start conversations with small talk concerning highly relatable topics like weather and current events. Then, once you establish that your thoughts are relatable, you can move on to the more nuanced discussion regarding the real issue at hand. Avoid all ambiguity. Language is often ambiguous. Words take multiple meanings. Each person may have their own slightly unique idea of what a word means. For example, you can refer to a person as mad. One person hearing this may imagine him as angry, while another gets the idea that he is insane. Furthermore, you could run a marathon. Are you in charge of the marathon, or are you competing in it? Ambiguity leads to misunderstandings and miscommunications. For the most effective communication, consciously navigate around ambiguities by including both context and words with clear definitions in your communication. Collaborate. Don't compete. Debaters and negotiators engage in their discussions because they want something to change. Whether it be the status quo, one's salary, or a legal policy, at least one side of the conversation wants to alter the way things are. As such, debaters and negotiators often imply that the other side of the conversation is their opponent. What you should instead do is frame the problem as your opponent. Frame the negotiation as a collaboration in which both sides work together to make sure both sides leave the agreement satisfied. Competitors tend to adopt hostile, tense body language as they prepare to attack and defend, verbally in your case. Relax and adopt the mindset that your conversational partner is your ally. Humility. Humility rules negotiation. Arrogance often leads to aggression and hostility. Until proven otherwise, you and your ideas are no better than the next person's, and vice versa. Remember, conversation is never a competition. Your conversational partner needs to believe that you are not a threat to his or her image. Listen. Don't plot. Many conversers make the unfortunate error of coming up with their next words to be spoken rather than focus on the words of the person talking to them. Listen. Additionally, do not switch subjects without resolving the one currently being discussed. This shows not only a lack of listening ability, but a lack of interest in the other person's ideas. Sit in chairs. This NLP tactic comes in handy when you need to resolve a problem of your own on your own. Start by seating yourself in one chair. Dedicate all of your thoughts and focus to your problem. Consciously notice the scents, sounds, and sights that you perceive. Give attention to your positioning, posture, and bodily sensations. Then, switch seats. Imagine a scenario from your past in which you had an experience that was totally different from your current problem. Repeat the observations you made while in the first chair. Keep this experience in your thoughts and sit in the first chair again. This process will help you apply a different frame of mind to your original problem. Repeat the process until a resolution comes about. Timing. Choosing the right time to have a conversation is just as important as the way in which you conduct said conversation. Some times just work better than others. For example, imagine you want to request a pay increase from your superior at work. Having that discussion while the boss is dealing with a public relations disaster will likely yield less results than if you were to have it when business is running smoothly. Similarly, talking to your teenage child about his cleaning habits immediately after he wakes up is not a great idea. Improperly timed conversations will not receive the attention and focus that they deserve. Of course, if the other person is creating time obstacles in order to avoid having a conversation, then that is a completely separate issue that should be addressed as such. If in doubt, ask the other person if now is a good time to hold a conversation. If they say no, ask them to come up with one. You may have to work with their schedule. Respect. Treat your conversational partners and debate opponents with respect, the same way that you would treat anyone else on this earth. You may have severe disagreements concerning their viewpoints, but that does not mean that you get to talk down to them. This respect is a surefire way to ensure that the other person will refuse to take you or your ideas seriously. Trade seats. This classic NLP tactic involves trading seats with your conversational partner before resuming discussion. Use it when you encounter a seemingly unresolvable disagreement. When you take on the other person's seating position, you place yourself closer to their perspective. Your physical positioning greatly affects the processes that occur in your brain. Pace and lead. In order to get somebody on your side, You need to convey that you can vibe with them. You cannot lead without pacing. So pace, then lead. Pacing is the process of matching your conversational tone to the other person's. If they start yelling, you may think that staying calm will demonstrate resolve. However, you should pace them by raising your voice as well. If they speak softly, you may believe that talking loudly will demonstrate power. Like before, you need to match their conversation style, so tone it down. Once you synchronize your conversation style to theirs, then you may start the leading process. You can now take the conversation from shouting to a more civil tone, for example. Slowly transition your manner of speaking, and you stand to effectively lead the conversation. Take a walk. Walking side by side with another human being connects the two of you in a different way than other forms of interaction. In order to walk beside another human, you must develop a synchronous walking rhythm with them. Consider the last time you and your friend disagreed while you were walking together. Chances are, you stopped in your tracks until you came to some sort of resolution. If you want to persuade another to agree with you, offer to go on a walk with them.